Let's talk. What you wanna talk about? Let's talk. What you wanna talk about? Kitchen talk. Let's talk. What you wanna talk about? Kitchen talk. Let's talk. Conversations that cool. Kitchen talk. What you wanna talk about? Kitchen talk. Let's talk. Conversations that cool. Let's talk. What you wanna talk about? Let's talk. What you wanna talk about?
Well, all right.
You're gonna learn today.
Hey, everybody.
Hello.
Goodness, I'm super excited. We did have to close the kitchen last week. I miss you guys. But everything happens for a reason. Sometimes we know the reason, sometimes we don't.
Hey.
But we are excited to be here. It is Kitchen Talk CTC.
Conversations that cook.
You got it. So Marvin Scott is here with me tonight. He is officially, I'm just gonna officially make you a co-host now. I mean, you might as well just be a co-host at this
Listen,
point.
I'm a running stand-in. Anytime you need me, just call my name. I'll be there.
Jazmyne, this is what we get. This is what I get.
I love it.
And so we also have with us tonight Dr. Jazmyne Simmons-Bryant. So excited. This is, oh my God, such a precious jewel. I love Jazz. I love her so much. Too. So we had decided, well, kind of I decided since I'm the executive director.
Amen.
You see how she threw that in there?
Executive director, executive producer, creator, all of that. That this month we're going to talk about the things people aren't talking about anymore. And the first kind of topic that came to my mind was HIV and AIDS. Like, you see a few commercials here and there, but nobody really is talking about it or buzzing about it like in the past. And not even, and I'm even thinking even pre-COVID, it was kind of, simmering or whatever. I remember, well, y'all know I'm 50. So I remember doing a paper in high school when it was called GERD, I think, or something like that. Yeah. Or GIRD, something it was. And I think that during that time, so this is the mid to late 80s, and it was more so a disease or an infection or a virus that only affected gay males.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of how they labeled it. And then it kind of took off, and then it was labeled as an epidemic, and the name kind of changed. And then it's like all of a sudden it just kind of died down. Like, I don't even understand why we don't really talk about it anymore. So that was one of the first things that came to my mind was, are we still dealing with this as an epidemic? And what is the reason why we're not talking about it as much as we used to? Is it because people are living with it now versus once you contract it, what we knew then was when you contracted it, you only had so much more time. It was kind of a death sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And so have we learned enough about it to where we don't have to educate as much? Have we learned enough about it to where we're just living with it like we live with hypertension, like we live with diabetes, and some of the other chronic illnesses that we live with? So that being said, I thought it would be really, really great to bring Dr. J on because this is one of her areas. So, Dr. J, give us just a little bit of your background and how you got involved in this particular disease.
Okay, awesome. So, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here to talk about this, especially with
Yay.
all the questions you just asked. But so my master's is in behavioral science and health education. I have a master's in public health. And shortly after I finished my master's, I was working, I started working at the Department of Health, the health department actually, as a minority AIDS coordinator. So I covered Region 2, and I was responsible for like HIV prevention, HIV care, and really trying to get our numbers down in Leon County and the surrounding areas. And so one of the things I was learning on the ground was that people weren't interested in a lot of the traditional education materials like pamphlets and brochures and health fairs and those kinds of things. And so I would say that was like my first professional introduction to the work of HIV and AIDS. And then from there, I moved forward while I was getting my doctorate to actually study like how can we help those living with HIV/AIDS better manage their disease and disclose and build relationships, and how can we debunk stigmas and all these kinds of things. So my first experience is the health department, and then it just sparked some research interest in me, and I've just been pursuing those passions ever since.
Wow. Wow. I do remember. So I do remember at one time it was really scary because the numbers were rising for Black women.
Mhm.
So what are we at this moment? What are we looking like as far as new cases, people living with HIV, and then the difference between the HIV and AIDS? Because I understand there is a difference.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yes. So we are still seeing an increase in certain age populations of Black women, right? So I'll just give a general stat for just Black slash African American. We account for about 12% of the US population, right? But in 2019, we accounted for over 40% of the new HIV diagnosis.
Wow.
And that's across Black men and Black women. When we narrow it down to Black women, of all the races and ethnicities of women diagnosed with HIV, Black women accounted for 54% of those. So it was
Wow.
about 6,700 cases, and we accounted for about 3,800 of those. So for African American women, for the Black community at large, HIV is still an issue.
Mm.
When we look at certain age groups, for some age groups like the 25 to 34, the numbers are kind of stabilizing, but they're still high, right? We're just not seeing a significant increase right now. But where we are seeing the increase is in Black women ages 55 plus. So, the
Really?
conversation, absolutely. And so a lot of times the assumption is that, oh, we're seeing an increase in, just the youth or, the high risk kids, but we're seeing an increase in Black women ages 55 plus as well. Whereas other ages are stabilized or decreasing. So it's still definitely an issue amongst the Black community and for Black women.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, is it still considered an epidemic? Are we still saying that about it?
Absolutely. So HIV is still an epidemic, and it's still impacting certain communities, obviously, as some of the stats just demonstrated, at disproportionate rates, right? You have, certain races and ethnicities that only account for a small percentage of the US population, making up almost over half of the new diagnosis, right? That is an epidemic, and that is a problem. And I think continuing to discuss that and keep this message going is so important, or else we will continue to see these increases, right? So certainly it is still an epidemic.
So Doc, let me ask this question because thinking like from a pharmacist standpoint, understanding that like for example, blacks have higher when it comes to hypertension, diabetes. We can look at diet, but then if our white counterparts are eating the same diet that we're eating, why is it that we're at a higher rate of hypertension? So we'll think about that from allostatic loads,
Mm-hmm.
the stress, the pressure, how our body handles things, and different things that are different. Even though we're eating the same, we're doing the same. but our bodies are under different stresses, different pressures, and so those numbers go up, and we can
Absolutely.
understand that. So help me. Do you, now before we get into political and hypothesized reasons, educationally, why do they tell us that the numbers in the black community are so much higher, where the young whites and the older whites are, are doing the same things? So why are the results in these numbers so much greater for our population?
So, one of the primary reasons is African Americans tend to mate with African Americans, right? So, it's easier to transmit the virus within our community. Secondly, we have lower rates of viral suppression, meaning that we struggle across demographics with medical adherence, which means we are more likely to be able to transmit the virus because it's not suppressed in our system. We don't have it managed or under control. And so, in comparison to, let's say, whites, for example, our medical adherence rates are a bit lower, which means we have higher viral loads in our community, which means increased risk of transmission. So, from the science side of it, that's like, one of the primary reasons is we're struggling with medical adherence, we're struggling with viral suppression, we're struggling with getting tested. So we may be living with HIV and don't know it, because all these other barriers prevent us from being tested and knowing our status. And so I won't get ahead of myself about, those things like you mentioned, but those are a couple of the factors, particularly medical adherence and testing.
Medical adherence testing, and I like the way you said, you have blacks who are mating predominantly with blacks, but then you have others that will also come into our community,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then once it's in that community, it spreads amongst that community, and then that's why those rates. So again, and I just wanted to point that out and bring that out because again, it would look like there's a problem with blacks and with our community, and it's so high amongst us, and 1 out of 3 or 4 African Americans have HIV, so forth and so on. But then there are some reasons there. It's not because as a whole something is wrong, but it's based off of one, on compliance, and then just understanding that how things spread amongst a group, you know. Um, so
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that anything is wrong with Black folk, right? It's not that
right,
anything is wrong with us,
Right.
right? It's just that we as a community, like you mentioned, for hypertension, diabetes, all of these chronic diseases, we have different circumstances. We have different social determinants of health. We have different social encounters that impact our behaviors, whether it's cultural, religion, whatever those things are. And it's just different from other communities. And so we see that play out in our rates.
yeah. So
So
I'll
why?
give.
Oh,
Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I was gonna ask why at this point, with all this many years and the research and the things that we have going on, why is the HIV not like a regular part of testing? Like we get tested, your levels for diabetes, your levels for this, your levels for that, because this is so prominent, or we know that it is at this point, are we labeling it a chronic illness, or and that sort of thing? So why is it not included in our blood work that we do every year?
So, to your first part, yes, HIV is a chronic illness. It is classified as a chronic illness. People are able to live a healthy, long life, just like any other chronic disease, right? But there are a few reasons why HIV testing isn't just given in your random panel. So you have a few things. You have some physicians who don't want to be known as the HIV doctor. So they're not going to really have that conversation with their patients and discuss that and try to get them tested, because we don't
Wow.
want to end up testing so many people. And if they test positive, then now it seems like I'm, the primary physician for HIV patients. You have some doctors who have stigmas around certain health conditions. So that's on the healthcare side. on the other side, for HIV, it requires a request and also, consent to be tested for HIV, right? And so you have some people who aren't requesting it or asking because their assumption is that maybe it is automatically included in this panel, but it's not. So they don't know to say, hey, I want to be screened for HIV and all the other panel of STIs. And so just educating in that realm as well. So it absolutely, should be just a part of our normal screening, but there's so many taboos and stigmas from the healthcare angle and the individual level and the community level that kind of impede that process from happening, which again leads to the rates that we see, right? If you don't get tested, you can't know, right? And if you're living with HIV, you can't prevent from spreading it if you're unaware of it, right? So it's so many factors that play into that. But it's not just at the individual level, it's at the healthcare level as well as the community level.
Yeah. And you have some individuals who look at it like cancer. I don't want to know.
Yes. They still feel it's a death. Some people still feel it's a death sentence, right? And even if they know that they can live a healthy life, once a person is diagnosed with HIV, it is a lot of responsibility placed on them. And a lot of times the individuals relaying that information are not relaying it in a way where it's palatable, right? And so it's kind of like, okay, you tested positive for HIV. Let me connect you to these services. This is what you're going to have to do for the state of Florida. It's illegal if you don't disclose. Charges can be pressed against you. There's this whole ramble of life-changing information that they're given, and they're expected to just take it in stride, right? And so those are some of the other factors that we see that kind of play into it, where it's like, well, if I know, now I'm responsible for all of these other factors, and I may not feel I have the support to manage those particular shifts in my life.
And so I think it was another question on the in the comments about men on the down low. Is that one of I know that used to be a thing for real, like
So so here's the thing. So the majority of transmission to Black women is heterosexual transmission. So about 84% of the transmission that we see in Black women is due to heterosexual sex, right? Men who have sex with men or males who engage in sexual encounters with other men account for a significant rate of HIV diagnosis as well, right? They are a high priority population. I wouldn't say it's about being on the down low. I would say it's about having conversations with who you're engaging with, right? Because if you don't talk, you don't know, right? And so someone may be bisexual, but if you're not asking questions and having conversations, it's very easy for that to get missed in translation. So it doesn't matter what someone's sexual orientation is. A simple test, a simple conversation, will let people know how to move forward, right? So I wouldn't pin it on a certain demographic. I would pin it on just having these conversations and creating an environment where we feel comfortable having these conversations with partners. Because for example, I have a class that I taught, that I teach, and we talk about sex. And I asked them, I said, is it easier to talk about sex or to just have sex? And they said, it's so much easier to just do it than to talk about it. We got to create the environment where people feel comfortable talking about it, because that's where prevention takes place. Right. So more so than pinning it on a population, we just really need to, as a community, create those environments where those conversations are happening.
Right. So I do remember it used to be really, really big, what's your status, before you get involved with somebody or whatever. But it doesn't seem like we really, again, things we're not talking about anymore.
Right. But to me, now you said the politically, the right stuff. But for me, when it comes to certain things, that should be truth in lending. I mean, there are certain things that, I feel like if you're swinging for both teams, you're going both ways. I think, me personally, I mean, hey, and it's so many times that a spouse doesn't know, you know what I mean? And he's going to hang out with the boys, and they're having these wild soirees. Hey, now again, on the pharmacy side, yeah, I understand that, but just that's low.
So here's the thing. Here's the general. If someone is in a marriage, obviously, that's a conversation, because whether they sleeping with the boys or the girls, shouldn't be no sleeping, right? So that's the bigger conversation. And then we just have to really be able to educate and understand how HIV transmit and why men who have sex with men we're seeing it at higher risk. And it's simply because of the type of sex, right? Anal sex is the easiest way to contract HIV, whether it's male on male or male with female. It's simply because of how the tissues are around the anus. It's nothing wrong with Black gay males. It's just the type of sex that transmits HIV the easiest, right? And so I think the main issue is, once again, not wanting to ask those questions, right? About, okay, who are you having sex with? What's going on? What's your status? Because yes, someone can say, okay, well, if you're having sex with men, you need to tell me. But if you're having sex with women, you need to tell me, because women are living with HIV too, right? So I think we have to just kind of try to be truthful in the whole conversation, because it's once we start to kind of say it's this demographic that's responsible for it, versus really just saying we haven't created an environment where people can be open. Like, let's not even get on how the Black community treats gay or bisexual Black men, where it's hard for them to come out and say, this is my lifestyle, right? So then we have to deal with the stigma around just being a gay Black male, just trying to live your regular everyday life, or a gay bisexual Black male who's just trying to live his regular life. So we've created this environment where those conversations can't happen, because, well, if I tell you that I'm bisexual, are you going to go and tell coworkers, church members, social circles, family members, right? And so we really put big limitations on those conversations where they just aren't happening.
It is so amazing how free we can have sex, but we can't talk about it.
Don't want to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it. And I mean, there's so many reasons why people don't want to talk about a naturally occurring phenomenon among human beings, right? We've created it where it's just such this big deal, right? And I shared with my students, I said, well, how would you feel if your partner went and, put their arm in the, machine to test their blood pressure? Oh, I wouldn't think anything about it. All right, so why do you care if, about if they go and get tested, or if you ask? I mean, it's a health screening. It's simply that, but we've created so much around it where it doesn't feel that way, right? And so the culture has to shift around it.
And a lot of times when we say we're talking about sex, we're not really talking about, sexual partners and being tested and things like that. We're talking about the encounter. And, there's an old song, let's talk about sex, baby. And you know what I'm saying? And again, in that song,
Marvin gonna give us at least 3. So we got 2 more coming, Jazz.
But even in that song, they're not talking about the conversations you're talking about. They're talking about what can we do during this act, versus let's talk about those important things that we need to talk about when it comes to sex.
Right. Absolutely.
Amazing. So we know that there is it's uncomfortable for some people to talk about sex, to talk about the feelings surrounding sex, to talk about what we need to do before we have sex, or plan it out, or however that go. But what else are you finding that you think, in your opinion, are making the numbers not level out?
I mean, honestly, the biggest thing I would say right now is stigma, because we've come so far biomedically, right? We know that people can live long, healthy lives. People can have babies without transmitting it perinatally. People can, have healthy sex lives with their partners without transmitting it, because we have medications. We have something called PrEP, which is pre-exposure prophylaxis. Someone who's not living with HIV can take this treatment every day to prevent contracting it should they come in contact with someone living with HIV. We have PEP, post-exposure prophylaxis, which if someone accidentally encounters HIV, whether occupationally or through a sexual encounter or injection drug use, they can take a regimen that'll help prevent that transmission, right? If they consume PEP in 72-hour period, right? Okay, right, Dr. Scott? Okay, right. So we have PrEP, we have PEP, and then we have antiretrovirals where people can be on one pill regimen, right? Where they're not taking this whole, cocktail of pills like they had to in the 80s. We
Right.
have the medicines in place to end the epidemic. We're no longer in that place where we don't have what we need to medically combat this illness.
Mm.
But we don't still have what we need as a community to engage people in testing or to engage and keep them in care. And so those are the primary things. If we can get people virally suppressed, you can stop the HIV epidemic. If we can keep people testing and knowing their status so that they can, prevent transmitting it to other people, we can wipe out HIV as an epidemic. It doesn't have to be a thing, but because we don't want to talk about it, because we still need to be more educated about it, we continue to see these increases because we blind ourselves to say that's only this population or that population. It doesn't happen over here, right? We continue to perpetuate the same risk behaviors that lead us to this epidemic. So we don't have to have an epidemic. We don't have to see these numbers we see among African Americans, but we have to do the work, right?
Right.
Especially in the realm of dealing with the stigma, dealing with the religious components, and finding our way to support the community who's living with HIV, and then to prevent it from transmitting to those who aren't.
Right. And when you were talking, it was like certain things popped up in my head. Like, you know what? That sounds like what you need to do to handle any epidemic.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you were talking, I'm like, wait a minute, that sounds like coronavirus. If,
Right.
if we can only get everybody to, but again, that goes back to having those conversations, the information that's out there, dealing with the stigmas. And again, you're saying a lot of people don't want to know because it's the stigma of, if I have this, not only what do others think about me, but how do I
Yeah. How
think
do I
about me?
feel? How
How
do
do
I
I
feel
feel?
about myself? And
Mhm.
internalized stigma is a really, really big factor.
Yeah.
That's one of the factors I study the most, is internalized stigma and how it impacts disclosure and medical adherence and people's self-efficacy and, engaging in relationships. And so internalized stigma is feeling negatively about yourself for living with HIV. And some of the reinforcers of that is how people treat you, right?
Mhm.
So if people start to treat you bad, that enacted stigma or that perceived stigma, it starts to settle in like, well, dang, maybe I'm not, good enough. Maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe I am being punished. Maybe they start to consume these thoughts and they internalize them. And it's so unfortunate because people living with HIV are worthy just like anybody else. But
Mm-hmm.
because they hear these messages and they get these feelings from family members and friends and community, it kind of settles and weighs on them. And when we talk about stigma, sometimes it's hard to imagine what that looks like. But stigma turns into depression,
Mm.
anxiety, right? It leads to other chronic illnesses among this particular demographic simply because of how people treat them and how those type of experiences weigh on them. And so it's so many other factors that go into that, that negatively weigh on individuals living with HIV.
Yeah. So I know in my experience, I have known a few people who have contracted HIV that turned into AIDS and then they passed away from it. And I remember just us kind of like coronavirus, like Dr. Scott was saying, not knowing enough that you kind of like, what do we do? I don't think we love that person any less. I think it was just more, oh, what can we touch? Can we hug them? Or, if they drink out of a cup, it was
Stigma.
all kind of stuff going on because we just didn't have the education of, how you get this disease. I mean, you hear, but you don't know. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So with that, so tell us, Dr. J, how do you contract HIV?
All right. So the three primary ways. So firstly, I'll just go over the fluids. So blood and semen, vaginal fluids. Those are the three primary fluids that can transmit HIV. HIV can be transmitted through sexual encounters, whether it's anal or vaginal. It can be contracted through injection drug use, which means sharing needles. So if someone is living with HIV and they use a needle and then someone comes and shoots up with the same needle, it can be transmitted that way. It can be transmitted perinatally, meaning from mother to baby. It can be transmitted also through breast milk as well. And so those are like the primary ways in which HIV can be transmitted. So yeah, those are the primary ways that it can be transmitted.
So I can get HIV from kissing.
No, you can't. So saliva is not a carrier of HIV. And so what, just, I'm not a virologist, but the basic understanding is knowing what environment certain viruses can thrive in, right? And so for HIV, it doesn't thrive or live in saliva, right? And so you can't transmit it through kissing. You can't transmit it through sharing, cups, forks, spoons, those type of things. Now, if someone has like a cut in their mouth and you have a cut in your mouth and there's blood, then maybe there's a small percentage that could transmit, but it's not transmitted through touching hands, through sweat. Like none of those other fluids can carry or transmit HIV. So if you hug some, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had a question. I want to ask Lisa first. This is an adult show, right?
Get out my mind. I was just thinking it is kitchen talk, and we are talking, so we got to be.
And the reason I asked it because you said sex, but understanding.
That's where I was going. Like
President Clinton says he did not have sex with that girl.
So I'll be straight up. You want me to tell? Is that what y'all saying? To just keep it straight up?
People.
Yes. That's all y'all had to say. So bisex, meaning penis entering vagina, penis entering an anal area, right? Those are the two primary ways in which HIV can be transmitted. Why? Because semen is being released, vaginal fluids are being released, potentially blood is being released if it's anal sex or even if it's vaginal sex. Mm-hmm.
But no, we're talking about oral sex because that's another aspect of it as well. Right.
So oral sex as well, but again, that would kind of have to be like if someone had like open sores and stuff in the mouth as well as how it could be transmitted. But
so even if one person, let's say, let's say a female, if she had HIV and a guy was performing oral sex or another female was performing oral sex, the possibility of them getting HIV from doing oral sex is very small.
It's low
because of the enzymes in the in saliva.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we have to also highlight is that exposure to HIV does not necessarily equal transmission. Right? You have to have the right environment for HIV to transmit to the next person. Correct. So, like you stated, if someone, has HIV and someone's performing oral sex, because of saliva and those enzymes, okay, yeah, you may have been exposed to someone living with HIV, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was the type of environment in which HIV can be transmitted. The most suitable environments for HIV to be transmitted is when we're talking about the exchange of sexual fluids, vaginal fluids, seminal fluids, where there's enough transmission of that virus entering that person's body to lead from exposure to transmission.
So I think that it's important.
He had to get straight to it.
Yeah, it's important because here, and even I hope we ain't got too many young children. It's after 9 o'clock; they need to be in the bed.
Well, we have numbers among young kids,
but that's what I'm
my 13-year-olds up.
Yeah.
13-year-olds can get tested, and by law, we don't have to disclose to the parents, so they need to know as well.
Yeah, and that's what I'm thinking. Like when he was like, "Okay, is this a show?" You know what? But the truth is, we gotta tell the truth because even if we don't talk to our teens, that's how they get in all of this trouble. Is because we don't have these conversations.
Right?
They have to know. No, if you kiss, okay, but if you doing other stuff, there are possibilities.
Right.
And we don't. I ain't gonna say all of us, because my mama and daddy, if you asked the question, they was gonna answer it. They didn't care how old you were. My mama felt like if you was old enough to ask the question, you needed to know the answer, the real answer. Not the makeup, not the plate, not the pocketbook, not the this, not the that. She was gonna tell you the truth.
And that's how it should be. That's how it should be.
Yeah.
But I used to try to tell my boys because I realized that a lot of times the person that you should get the information from, you don't. And they normally go and talk to somebody who know even less than they know.
Mhm.
And they think they're experienced, and so, oh, we'll talk to them. And said, man, look, I know more about anything you want to do out there than any of your friends. I've had more. My wife listening to this,
You
honey, I love you.
say it nicely, say it right.
But I'm just saying, I've had more life experiences than any of your friends have.
Mhm.
So if you have any question when it comes to sex or anything out there, I'm here. Don't talk to them and then talk to me after you create a mistake.
Right.
Right.
Talk to me first. And so, but you try to create that environment, and I think that's the thing. As you're talking to us about creating that environment, how do we create the environment so that they feel comfortable talking with the right people? They
Oh, that's
feel
good.
comfortable talking to it with their friends and their
Mhm.
peers. But when someone else who has the information and the knowledge, a lot of times they don't feel comfortable talking. So, do you have any ideas of how do we break those barriers?
Right. So connecting with our youth and young adults is so important. Uh, Updating the way in which we relay these messages is important.
Mhm.
So just from what you've stated as a parent, I'm not a parent, but I can speak as a child. My mom was open and honest with me. Like I knew about everything early on, and it was probably because she has a public health background as well. So she was like schooling me. She wasn't sugarcoating it either. But I think one of the issues is sometimes parents aren't as open and honest, right? Sometimes parents don't necessarily connect with their kids and let them know that I know and I have these experiences, right? Because you want to keep your kids sometimes sheltered from this information, certain parents,
Mhm.
right? So that's one of the things. From the communication angle, as far as like different campaigns and things like that, social media has been a really good platform for relaying sexual health information. You have some
Mhm.
really good content creators who are, relaying this information about herpes and sexually transmitted infections. You have some people who are living with these conditions who are being open and sharing information. So, as a parent, find those people on TikTok, share it with your kids. If because that's what's influencing them, that's what they're looking at, that's what they're
Mhm.
listening to. And then also one of my favorite ways of educating people is using entertainment education, which is basically finding content that integrates health information in a way where it's not so pushy.
Mhm.
Because we know teenagers and young adults, they have rebel spirits. It's just that just is what it is. They don't want anybody telling them what to do. And to some degree, that's a strength and a weakness, right? Because sometimes we need that rebel spirit in the right time, right? But for them, they're more receptive when they feel they're making their own choice,
Mhm.
right? And so for when I like to look at entertainment ed, it's one of those things where they get to watch the content, they see these consequences play out for peers and people who look like them, act like them, and then they're left with the decisions to make, right? And so I don't know if you all have heard of the show like East Los High. It came on Hulu. It was a really, really great show that dealt with teenage drama among a group of Hispanic high school students. But it
Mhm.
kept it real, it kept it raw, but it was very educational. And they saw significant decreases in sexual, like high risk sexual behaviors and all those things among the community. Why? Because kids saw other kids living those experiences and they're like, "Ooh, I don't want to have an unexpected pregnancy. I don't want to end up with an STI." And they made those choices for themselves. So it's a little bit of educating them, but then also putting them in position to get content where they're left with making those decisions for themselves because they're really smart. They don't really want to deal with these risks. They know they're out there, right? But it's just how we communicate it so that they can feel some autonomy over that decision making.
Mhm. It is very interesting how we have given so much exposure to our children, but we don't want to talk about it with them.
Mm-hmm.
From the time that they are able to look at this phone and
Mhm.
play a game or watch whatever, we just give it to them and then we through. We like, okay, they out of our hair. But it's so much that they are seeing and exposed to, and we don't explain it to them. We expect them to figure it out themselves, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I don't have children yet either, but It's it's so different from our times. And I think we do have to move with those times and still be, parents, still be aunties and uncles and godparents, and still, always think about how I was raised. And I always say, when I have children, I'm gonna raise my kids just like my mom and dad raised me. Even though it's a different time, I just feel like, okay, we turned out all right. So, what's why we need to change? I know we might need to adjust a little bit, but to me, it's like, because they're exposed to so much, that to me is all the more reason why we should be so much more involved in their lives, right? So one of the things that you said that stuck out to me is you kept saying STI. So
Mhm.
is that a change from STD?
So that sexually transmitted infection is used now more commonly to sexually transmitted diseases. And it's really just because a lot of sexually transmitted infections are curable, right? They're not like long term chronic diseases that people are living with. So STI, I mean, it's interchangeable, but it is the more common term now that's used, which we are seeing an increase. We saw increase in STIs during COVID. Um, Among our youth and young adults as well. So CDC just released that data about 3 days ago, their new surveillance data. So chlamydia, gonorrhea,
Oh
syphilis,
my God.
especially, there's some increases in those STIs.
So
So
STIs and babies. We got COVID STIs and COVID babies.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a lot that's going on, and it's a lot of conversations that still need to be had. A lot of resources and conversation obviously had to shift during COVID. So we saw low testing rates, obviously because people were isolating and, some of the, resources had to be shifted. But it's so important that we continue and resume and continue these conversations because it's still pervasive, right, for certain age groups and certain racial and ethnic minorities.
Yeah,
But you know
I
what?
think that oh, go ahead, Marvin.
I was just going to say, how you were saying things that we don't talk about, right? And like you're not really talking about HIV, AIDS, but that goes back to you're not talking about chlamydia and
Mhm.
gonorrhea, and
Mhm.
those things are still out there and they're still real. And so it just made me think, in the sense of a lot of times we don't focus on those because now they're treatable.
Mm,
Mhm.
You know what I mean? They're treatable. I don't think that's the same reason we're not talking about HIV AIDS as much,
Mhm.
but those kind of like we kind of like let them go and kind of just like why? Because I've heard people say this when I was in college. Hey, I just go get a shot for that.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So for them it's whatever. You know what I mean? I think HIV AIDS we're not talking about that the same because of it's the stigma and things like that as to why we're not talking about it as much. So I think it's still in the background too. But to me, also, I think the stigma that goes along with it and what's being pushed in today's agenda, those two things don't go well together
mm.
Mhm.
because of the stigma. So we have to keep that down, kind of suppress that because we're pushing a different agenda, and that fights against the agenda that we're trying to push.
It
That's how.
is, yeah, it is interesting. I was thinking when you were talking about entertainment education, how we are so influenced by our media.
Mhm.
Mhm.
We are
It's
so influenced by our media. And back they were saying, like, back when, a different world was on, it was like, colleges were being flooded, because everybody wanted that experience.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And then we start getting, I don't want to say trash TV, but we start getting things that were less, positive. I remember um this show called Rock with oh gosh, what's the, I
Charles
can't,
Dutton.
say it again.
Charles Dutton.
Charles, yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Mhm.
how they touched on one time this show about gang violence.
Mhm.
It was so powerful. And they were like canceled the next few weeks. but then you get like a Blackish, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And it's like when they did the show talking about how they felt about the police brutality and police murdering of black men and women, and it was so powerful. And I remember saying after I saw it, well, it was nice knowing you, Blackish, because it was so powerful and it was so real. But they, I guess maybe we a little bit more progressive. I don't know. But they left them on, and now they're in their last season now. But if you watch their, oh my God, that stuff is so good, and it's hard hitting with a little bit of funny, but it
Right.
makes you go, hmm, you
But
know.
Absolutely.
I,
It's content that makes you think. And with entertainment ed, the power of it is it has the ability to absorb us into into the narrative, right? Good quality content can absorb us into the narrative where we forget all about our own opinions and feelings, and we are literally identifying with the people on the screen. We built these parasocial relationships where they become our friend. We can't wait to see them next week and hear what they have to say. And so all of those like elements play into the power of entertainment ed, where people connect and they see people's experiences and they think about them and they learn from them and they see how it's relevant and how it's applicable, right? And so that's one of my favorite tools. I study that a lot in my research, on how to use it to help women safely disclose their status, how to use it to see if it can help with medical adherence, see if it can help reduce internalized stigma. And, some of my research has found some really powerful things as it relates to entertainment ed and its ability to help those, particularly Black women who are living with HIV. So it's one of my favorite strategies. It's not a, fix all, but
right.
it really is a powerful tool that allows people to critically think for themselves and then make decisions based on what they see. Do I want these outcomes? Are they good? Are they bad? Will this work for me? So it's certainly one of my favorites, certainly.
Yeah, I think someone had put something on the screen earlier at the bottom about information, because some people are getting bad information. So
Mm-hmm.
even with the entertainment ed or just entertainment and we call it programming anyway, I think the best information is not one that's trying to push one side or the other.
Right.
It's presenting the information and
Mm-hmm.
letting you see the outcomes of the choices that you make, and then from there you can sit back and evaluate and then say, well, I don't want that for myself, or I do want that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's important, going back to the information, because now it's a lot of information out there, but they're trying to program you to push you in one direction.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And you're so right. The best content sticks to the facts. One of my favorite producers and friend, who does a lot of this work, Nathan Hell Williams. He has a short film called 90 Days, which is what I've been studying for about 5 years now in different ways, across different populations. And he does such a great job with just integrating the facts. And his approach, like he partnered with CDC to get funding, AIDS Healthcare Foundation to get funding. His film stars Teyana Paris. Like he really has a way of like integrating the facts into such a romantic comedy type of way for the 90 Days film that really just gives you the information. I mean, it's a 20-minute short film, but it's power packed full of information. Paula Washington is in it. Like, I mean, he does this so impeccably. And so now he's getting ready to produce a feature-length film based on the 90 Days film. But I mean, you're right. It has to give the facts. It has to be genuine. It has to be authentic and really share the lens of, of the viewers you seek to entertain.
Right.
I
So
think that's too. I'm sorry, Marvin.
no, I was just going to say, so at some point in time, can you send Lisa some of those links that have, the good content that's facts, so that she can post it so that people can see it. You know what I mean? Because those are the things that we need to
Absolutely.
begin to spread. Because again, there's so much disinformation, not just
Right.
misinformation, but things that are intentionally
Right.
wrong
Right.
Mm-hmm.
to program and lead people the wrong way. So we do need to be able to say, hey, this is the right content, and that right content needs to be in front of our youth more and more. Because
Mhm.
with today's society, it's not about what's right or true, it's about what's popular.
Right. What's believable, right?
What's
What has
believable.
just
So,
enough to connect with me and, swoop me right on into that stream
Mhm.
of whatever it is.
right.
You're right. You're so right.
And powered by the money. Like that's really, if
Yeah.
this gonna hurt my money, y'all don't need to know about that.
Right.
But if this
You're
gonna
right.
make me some more money, okay, I'll let y'all know about that. Yeah, it's crazy. But what I was thinking was, um, the marrying of art and science.
Uh, it's my happy
It's
place.
yeah. You can't get around it. So we spend so much time trying to separate the two,
And you shouldn't.
but you shouldn't. You
Yeah.
need both of them. You
Mhm.
Yeah.
need both of them because if you stood here and some of the terms that y'all was using when y'all was talking that science stuff, I was like, But the marrying of the art and science. So I'm definitely the artist, but the marrying of the art and science, we got to make sure that we put it together so that information is given in a palatable way that makes people think. Like you
Mhm.
said,
Yeah.
not stuffing stuff down your throat. I feel that way about religion and everything. You
Right.
know, you
You're
got to
right.
make it to where people can make their own informed decisions.
Right, absolutely. And you said it so well. There's no reason to separate the art and the science, right? Humans are logical, right? Which is the knowledge, but we're also emotional,
Yeah.
right? We have emotions, we connect, and that's where the arts are so powerful, right? You can give me facts, until I'm blue in the face, but if it doesn't connect with me, if it doesn't register something with my beliefs, with my values, with my
Mhm.
attitude, with my culture, then likely it won't happen, right?
Mhm.
And we see that all the time, right? On the science side, there'll be an intervention, right? We have the COVID vaccine, right? But connecting people where they see the value in that, right? That's the communication angle. That's the art angle, right? So you'll see the commercials now that say, get back to spending time with your family, get back to the hobbies and the things you love. It's appealing to our emotional side. It's appealing to those things that we value and we treasure every day. Just saying getting a vaccine or a brochure on a vaccine is not necessarily the
Right.
best way to connect with people. But those hard hitting things that we wake up and go to bed with every day, those things are often best communicated, when we can use a little bit of art, integrated obviously with the science.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because even in medical school, over the past years, they started accepting more and more people with an art background than just biology pre-med.
Yeah, because here's the thing, for example, scientists are working on an HIV vaccine, right? NIH is already giving out grant funding to figure out vaccine hesitancy with HIV and what type of
Mm.
communication messages can work. Why? Because it doesn't matter what we have on the science side, right? Or as far as biomedical, if people don't feel connected enough to uptake it.
Mhm.
So you need that, we need that balance because humans are not just logical. We're not just scientific, right? There are other things that connect with us a little bit more powerfully sometimes than just stats and data.
Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we married the arts and the science. I love it. I love it. I love it.
Absolutely.
So what would be your advice to us about helping get more of this word out, or helping us even restart the conversation
Mhm.
that has seemed to, been quieted? What would be your advice for folks that, that want to help lower our numbers?
So the first thing I would say is self-assess, right? I would say for each individual to be honest with yourself about any biases or stigmas or
Mm,
stereotypes or misperceptions you have about HIV, STIs, sexual orientation, pronouns, because all of those things play a part. And then once you figure out, okay, I don't have these biases, like, and if you do, address those, right? Because that's the only way we can move forward as a community, is if we as individuals address any biases or stigmas that we have against community, right? Against people living with HIV or gay or bisexual or transgender, right? And then once we can deal with those at the individual level, be honest in conversation, and don't hesitate to inform people if they're relaying misinformation or if they're being derogatory about certain populations of people. Sometimes people get comfortable just kind of laughing off some of the comments and things that people say. It's not okay, right? Because it's those small comments that people hear that make them not go get tested, that make them not disclose, that make them not be medically adherent. So we can each take a part by making sure our network, is open, honest, receptive, and empathetic. I mean, that is the biggest thing, is empathy, because stigma exists because we judge people. We put them in categories, we ostracize, we, do all these things. But if we can be honest with ourselves and then check our networks and then spread factual information, support community, I think those simple things will take us a very long way.
Nice.
I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that. Okay.
Get to it.
I think it's just so important. And like I said at the top of the show, when I was thinking about the things that we just don't talk about anymore, that was one of the things that came to my mind. Like, how we just lay things aside if it's not a hot topic anymore. But yet people are still contracting HIV. People are still dying from the complications with, but it's more you die with the complications of AIDS, right?
So that's when the viral count, the CD4 viral count increases, and that's the later stage of HIV. But people don't have to get to that stage if they can be virally suppressed, right? So yes, AIDS is, the ending stage, if you wanted to put it in that way, of phases for, the transition of HIV to AIDS, but it doesn't have to get there.
But okay, so clear this up for me. Do you die because of the AIDS, or is it just not able to fight off infection anymore, or?
So usually it's complications associated with AIDS, but because of the weakened immune system. And so other diseases kick in, like something like pneumonia or COVID, right? Because the body is no longer able to fight off those diseases, because those healthy cells that we need in our immune system are extremely compromised when a person reaches the AIDS stage. So usually it's associated complications. Dr. Scott, did I cover it? Help me out.
Yeah. That's what I was just going to basically say. The easy way to realize it is it's like, for example, you have a cold, you have the cold virus, but you're not feeling sick. You follow what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, when you really get to the stage where you're feeling sick and your immune system is compromised and everything, now you basically had a full-blown cold, right? So HIV, you have the virus, but you're still able to do certain things, and the viral load hadn't increased to a point where now your immune system is completely compromised. And so it's not just that you get infections, but there are some infections that we come in contact with on a regular basis that wouldn't make us sick. Like as an adult, we don't get thrush. But when you become immunely compromised, now you can develop thrush. You see what I'm saying? So certain infections that our body would normally fight off, as it continues to grow and progress into full-blown, what we call full-blown AIDS, now your immune system is suppressed. So now certain things that you should be able to fight off, that a person with a normal functioning immune system would be able to fight off, you can't. They can't fight it off.
Yeah. So there is a difference, because a lot of people say, I heard they got AIDS, and the person is living with HIV, right? So just being knowledgeable that those are two separate things. It's acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, meaning it has happened over a period of time. And just as another nugget, no one can give somebody AIDS It is a stage of the HIV progression. So no one can transmit AIDS to someone. They can transmit the HIV virus, but they cannot transmit AIDS. That is a stage that happens if you wanted to just put it like stages of cancer, right? AIDS is a ending stage, for lack of a better term, of experiencing and living with HIV.
So one last question. So with HIV, are you ever without it? Like once you contract it, does it just stay with you for the rest of your life? Or are you ever like you don't have it anymore?
So the primary goal is to become virally suppressed. And what that means is to have so few copies of the HIV virus in the bloodstream that it doesn't even pick up on a test. So the person would still technically be living with HIV, but it's so suppressed where it's not even picking up on a test. And there has been, some cases here and there where scientists are reporting people are being cured of HIV. But for the general population, the goal is viral suppression, meaning being medically adherent, consuming their antiretroviral medicines as prescribed so that it can reduce those copies of HIV in their system where it doesn't even pick up on a test and it is practically impossible to transmit it to someone else.
Right.
That is some good information. I am so glad we had this conversation. Thank you, Dr. J, for joining
Thank you for
us
having
tonight.
me. It's been a pleasure.
It's amazing, amazing, amazing. And I was like, okay, well, I got to have this conversation. I got to call Jazz.
Oh, I'm glad you thought of me. It's a sheer privilege.
Yes,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
So, listen, if you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss no shows no more. Cause we be chatting it up in the kitchen. If you're watching us on Facebook, hit the like button. We are super excited. This is Kitchen Talk CTC.
Conversations that cook.
And they do. We miss friends. We miss JT tonight. But thank you, Dr. Marvin Scott, for hanging out with me tonight as my co-host. I appreciate you so much. JC in the background. Appreciate you for helping us out. Listen, we're gonna be right back here next Thursday, talking about things that we don't talk about anymore. And we'll see what the next conversation is going to bring us. It might be something pretty exciting. Well, I always think all of them are exciting. So I look forward to this every week. So thank you. So see you guys next Thursday. Thank you again, Dr. J. Appreciate you.
Of course, my pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I enjoyed both.
Well, you'll be back. All right. Good night, guys.